The Galactic Military Academy had stood for over 3,000 cycles as the premier institution for training the galaxy's finest military minds. And located on the neutral world of Valoris Prime, it accepted only the best cadets from hundreds of member species. And among its many prestigious programs, none held more weight than the legendary Tactical Command Simulation, a virtual war game that had never been beaten in under 10 standard years. Commander Vexthor, a towering Krellian with silver-scaled skin and 4 calculating eyes, stood before the assembled cadets in the grand simulation chamber, and his species had dominated military strategy for centuries, and he took particular pride in the simulation's impossible difficulty. And this exercise has humbled the greatest tactical minds in the galaxy, he announced, his voice resonating through the chamber, and the average completion time is 12.4 years, and the record is 9 years and 7 months, held by a Zenthari admiral who now commands an entire fleet. The simulation was deceptively simple in concept, but brutally complex in execution, and cadets would command a small fleet against an adaptive AI that controlled overwhelming enemy forces. And the AI learned from every move, exploited every weakness and adapted to every strategy, and resources were limited, reinforcements were scarce, and the enemy never stopped evolving. Among the current class of 200 cadets, only 7 were human, and Earth had been inducted into the Galactic Council just 15 years prior, and humans were still considered an oddity, and most species viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and mild concern. And after all, humans came from Earth, a Class 12 death world where nearly everything could kill you, and the fact that they had not only survived but thrived on such a hostile planet made them interesting, if somewhat reckless. Lieutenant Jake Morrison stood at attention alongside his fellow human cadets, and at 24, he was lean and athletic with sharp brown eyes that constantly scanned his surroundings. And next to him was Katie Brennan, a tactical prodigy with red hair pulled back in a tight bun, whose analytical mind had already earned her top marks in every strategy course. And beside her stood the hulking form of Ryan Tucker, a former Marine whose physical presence made even the larger alien species give him a wide berth. The other human cadets rounded out their team, and Danny Warren was a pilot with reflexes that astounded the instructors, and Lisa Cortez was a communications specialist fluent in 14 galactic languages, and Kevin Brooks was an engineer who could jury-rig solutions from whatever materials were available. And Amy Foster was a medical officer whose calm under pressure had already saved lives during training exercises. You will be assigned to mixed species teams, Vexthor continued, and the simulation begins in 3 days. And use this time to familiarize yourselves with your teammates and develop your initial strategy. And I will observe your efforts with great interest, though I warn you not to expect miracles. And this simulation has broken countless promising careers. The human cadets exchanged glances, and there was no arrogance in their expressions, just a quiet confidence that had become their trademark, and they had noticed something in their months at the academy. And while their alien classmates were brilliant strategists who could calculate odds and plan campaigns with mathematical precision, they often seemed to lack something humans took for granted, and that was the ability to think on their feet when everything went wrong. As the cadets filed out to meet their assigned teams, Jake found himself paired with a Zenthari named Silnara, whose species was renowned for their logical thinking, and a Vrex engineer named Clickthar, who communicated through a series of clicks and had cybernetic enhancements. And they seemed competent enough. But Jake could already see the cultural divide, and the Zenthari wanted to spend days analyzing data before making any moves. And the Vrex wanted to optimize every system to theoretical perfection before deployment. This is going to be interesting, Katie muttered to Jake as they walked to the barracks. And they plan like they've got unlimited time. Yeah, Jake replied. And they've never had to make life or death decisions in 2 seconds, because a grizzly bear just charged their campsite. Ryan overheard and grinned. And/or because your parachute didn't open right and you've got about 15 seconds to figure out your reserve? The other human cadets nodded in understanding, and they had all grown up on a world where danger was constant, where thinking fast was survival, and where following the plan exactly often got you killed. And it was hardwired into their DNA now, a gift from ancestors who had survived saber-toothed cats, ice ages, and countless other existential threats. 3 days. Amy said thoughtfully, and think they'll listen if we suggest aggressive tactics. Not likely, Lisa answered, and I've been studying their military history. And most galactic conflicts are fought like chess games in slow motion, and decisive action is considered reckless. Then we show them what reckless really looks like, Danny said with a smirk. As the humans dispersed to their various team assignments, none of them noticed Commander Vexthor watching from an observation deck above, and his expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, and he had served in actual combat, unlike most of the Academy instructors, and he had read the classified reports about humanity's own brutal history of warfare, and a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times before achieving space travel, and a species that had weaponized everything from rocks to atoms, and a species whose idea of entertainment often involved simulating combat. He wondered if the simulation's AI was ready for that kind of thinking. And then he dismissed the thought, and the AI had defeated the best minds in the galaxy, and a handful of humans from a newly inducted species would be no different. Over the next 3 days, the human cadets worked with their assigned teammates, and the cultural differences became more apparent with each planning session, and Jake's team spent hours discussing defensive positions and resource management. And Silnara wanted to model every possible outcome before committing to any strategy, and Klikthar wanted to run simulations of simulations to optimize their approach. Jake listened patiently, contributing when asked, but he was also watching and learning, and he noticed that his alien teammates never discussed what to do when the plan failed, and they seemed to believe that sufficient planning would prevent failure. And this was a fundamental difference in thinking, and humans always assumed plans would fail because on Earth, plans always did fail. Katie was having similar experiences with her team, and her Crystallian teammate wanted to spend the entire 3 days just analyzing the enemy's historical patterns. And her Vrex partner wanted to build mathematical models of every engagement. And when Katie suggested they should prepare for rapid adaptation during combat, her teammates looked at her as if she had suggested breathing vacuum. Ryan's experience was perhaps the most frustrating, and his team wanted to establish communication protocols and chain of command procedures before even discussing tactics. And when Ryan pointed out that in actual combat, communication often breaks down and commanders must act independently, his teammates seemed genuinely confused by the concept. The human cadets met privately on the evening before the simulation began, and they gathered in an unused training room, away from curious alien eyes. Anyone else feel like we're speaking different languages? Kevin asked. And I mean beyond the actual language differences. It's a mindset thing, Lisa explained, and most galactic species evolved in relatively stable environments, and they developed warfare as an extension of their existing social structures, and it's all very orderly and predictable. Whereas we're from a planet that's been trying to kill us since day one, Danny added, and we learned to fight dirty because that was the only way to survive. So what do? Amy asked. And do we try to convince our teams to be more aggressive, or do we just do our own thing? Jake had been thinking about this, and we adapt to them initially, he said, and we show respect for their methods and learn what we can. But when the simulation starts, we do what we do best and we react, we improvise, and we win. The others nodded in agreement, and there was an unspoken understanding among them. And they were representing not just themselves, but their entire species. And Earth was still new to the galactic community, still proving itself. And this simulation was an opportunity to show what humans could do. Think the instructors are ready for us? Ryan asked with a grin. Not even a little bit, Katie replied. And that's going to be the fun part. The next morning, the cadets assembled in the simulation chamber, and the room hummed with energy as technicians made final preparations, and Commander Vexthor stood at the central platform, his 4 eyes sweeping across the assembled students. Today, you begin a journey that has challenged the greatest military minds in galactic history, he announced, and some of you will surprise yourselves with your capabilities, and others will learn the hard lessons of command, and all of you will emerge from this experience changed. He paused, his gaze lingering on the human cadets for just a moment longer than the others. Remember that this simulation exists not to break you, but to forge you into better leaders. And the enemy you face is not cruel, merely unforgiving, and it will exploit every hesitation, every mistake, every moment of doubt, and your only advantages are your mind, your team, and your willingness to adapt. The cadets filed into their assigned command pods, and Jake settled into his station, feeling the neural link activate and sync with his brainwaves. and around him the pod came alive with three-dimensional star maps, fleet positions, and an overwhelming amount of data, and his teammates took their positions at the tactical and engineering stations. "Are you prepared?" "Cadet Morrison," Silnara asked, her melodic voice carrying a hint of nervousness. Jake looked at the tactical display, seeing the overwhelming enemy forces, the limited resources, the impossible odds, and he thought about his ancestors who had faced down predators with nothing but rocks and determination, and he thought about the human history of turning certain defeat into unlikely victory through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. "Yeah," he said with a slight smile, "and I'm ready. And let's show them something new." The simulation chamber hummed with energy as the first teams entered their command pods, and each pod contained holographic displays, tactical interfaces, and neural links that would allow the cadets to control their virtual fleets as if they were actually in space. And the setup was considered the pinnacle of military training technology, used by every major military academy in the galaxy. Jake Morrison settled into his command chair, feeling the neural link activate and sync with his brainwaves. And around him the pod came alive with three-dimensional star maps, fleet positions, and an overwhelming amount of data, and his teammates, Silnara and Clickthar, took their positions at the tactical and engineering stations respectively. "Initial assessment," Silnara said in the melodic tones of her species. "And we command 7 light cruisers, 3 frigates, and 1 carrier, and ammunition and fuel reserves are limited to standard combat loads, and enemy forces are estimated at 5 times our strength with production facilities located in 3 star systems. Conventional wisdom suggests a defensive posture." Clickthar clicked through his translator. "And preserve resources, conduct guerrilla strikes, slowly diminish enemy production capacity over extended campaign." Jake studied the map, and the setup was indeed daunting, and their small fleet was outgunned, outnumbered, and out-resourced, and the AI had positioned its forces to protect its production facilities while maintaining enough mobile fleets to hunt down the players' forces. And previous cadets had spent years in simulated time, carefully planning each engagement, slowly grinding down the enemy's advantages. "That's what everyone does," Jake said. "And what if we don't?" Silnara's large eyes blinked in confusion. "And alternative strategies have been analyzed extensively, and the mathematics clearly indicate that aggressive action leads to rapid defeat, and the simulation AI punishes reckless behavior with overwhelming force." "Right. But has anyone tried hitting it so fast and hard that it doesn't have time to adapt?" Jake asked, and he was already manipulating the holographic display, highlighting one of the enemy production facilities. "And look at this, and the facility, at Beta Station, and it's their primary shipyard, and heavily defended, sure, but all their defenses are positioned for long-range engagement, and they're expecting us to siege it. Because sieging it is the logical approach," Silnara protested, "and a direct assault would cost us most of our fleet." "Maybe," Jake admitted, but if we take out their main production early, they can't replace their losses, and we trade ships for time, and in the long run, we win." Clickthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation, and this contradicts all established tactical doctrine, and the risk assessment is unacceptable. Jake leaned back in his chair thinking about how to explain this. "And on Earth, we have this old saying, and fortune favors the bold, and sometimes the crazy move is the right move because nobody expects it, and the AI is designed to counter logical tactics, and what if we don't give it logical tactics to counter?" The debate continued for the better part of an hour, and in other pods, Jake knew his fellow humans were probably having similar arguments with their alien teammates, and the cultural gap was wider than he had anticipated, and what seemed like obvious flexibility to humans appeared as dangerous chaos to species that had evolved in more stable environments. Finally, Silnara agreed to a compromise, and they would observe the AI's initial moves for 1 simulated day, then decide on their approach, and Jake accepted this, knowing it was the best he would get for now. As the simulation began, the AI acted exactly as predicted, and it positioned its superior forces to protect its assets while sending probe attacks to gauge the player's strength and tactics, and standard procedure, and expected behavior, and the kind of opening that had preceded 10,000 similar campaigns. Jake watched and waited, and he had a gift that many humans shared but few alien species seemed to possess, and that was pattern recognition born from predatory instincts. and his ancestors had tracked prey across vast distances, reading signs in broken grass and disturbed soil, and that same instinct now applied to fleet movements and tactical patterns. After the observation period ended, Jake presented his plan with modifications, and we split our forces and used 3 frigates as bait to draw out their mobile fleet here. He pointed to a position near a nebula, and while they're committed to that engagement, we take the carrier and all 7 cruisers on a direct jump to Beta Station. And we hit the station with everything we have, and the shipyard goes down, and we jump out before their main fleet can return. The losses from such an assault, Silnara began. Will be acceptable, Jake interrupted, and we'll lose ships, maybe half our attack force, but we cripple their production, and every ship they lose after that can't be replaced, and we repeat this pattern. Hitting hard, taking losses, but always making sure they lose more than they can replace. Clickthur ran calculations, his cybernetic enhancements processing data at incredible speeds, and the mathematics are unusual, and if executed perfectly, there is a 34% probability of success, and that is significantly higher than I calculated possible. 34% is terrible odds by galactic standards, Silnara pointed out. But not by human standards, Jake countered with a slight smile, and sometimes you have to risk everything to win. After much deliberation, his teammates agreed to try the plan, and after all, this was just a simulation, and the worst that could happen was failure, and everyone expected to fail anyway. What happened next would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for decades to come. The human-led teams launched their assaults simultaneously across multiple simulation instances, and the coordinated timing was not planned, and it was simply how humans thought when given a problem, and attack now and hit hard and don't give the enemy time to think. Jake's team executed their plan with precision, and the 3 frigates led the enemy's mobile fleet on a chase through the nebula, using the interference to mask their weakness. And meanwhile, Jake took the carrier and cruisers on a micro-jump directly into orbit around Beta Station. The AI's defensive forces engaged immediately, exactly as expected, and shields flared, weapons fired, and ships began taking damage, and Jake's forces pushed through the defensive perimeter, losing 1 cruiser to concentrated fire, and then another. And the carrier took heavy damage but pressed forward, launching fighters in waves. We should retreat, Silnara urged, and we are sustaining critical damage. Not yet, Jake said through gritted teeth, and almost there. The remaining cruisers formed a spearhead, their combined fire focused on one section of the station's shields, and the barrier flickered, failed, and weapons tore into the station's superstructure. And secondary explosions blossomed across the facility, and the station's central reactor went critical. Jump now, Jake ordered. The surviving ships and 3 cruisers and the heavily damaged carrier, and made emergency jumps just as Beta Station exploded in a spectacular fireball, and they had lost 4 cruisers and 6 frigates total, counting the bait force, and nearly 2/3 of their fleet, but the AI's primary production facility was gone. In the observation room, Commander Vex Thor stood frozen, all 4 eyes wide, and the humans had done the unthinkable, and they had traded valuable ships for a strategic target in the opening. Moves of the simulation, and it was reckless, and it was aggressive, and it was tactically brilliant in a way he had never seen before. And across 7 different simulation instances, 7 human-led teams had just done essentially the same thing, each with minor variations, but all following the same core philosophy, and hit first, hit hard, accept losses, but make every loss count. The AI adapted quickly, of course, and it recognized the threat and redistributed its forces. But something had changed, and the humans had seized initiative, and they were not giving it back, and they fought like the Deathworlders they were. An aggressive, creative, and utterly unwilling to follow the rules that other species took for granted. Katie Brennan's voice crackled over an unauthorized communication channel that the humans had established between their separate simulation instances, and the AI in my instance just repositioned forces from Sector 7 to defend against my attack on Gamma Station, and that means Sector 7 is vulnerable. Confirmed, Danny Warren chimed in, and I'm seeing the same pattern, and it's pulling from the periphery to protect the core. Jake studied his tactical display, and the humans had figured out something that the AI's programmers had never anticipated. And they were treating 7 separate simulation instances as one coordinated campaign, and they were sharing intelligence, identifying patterns across multiple scenarios, and exploiting weaknesses that only became visible when you looked at the bigger picture. Ryan, you're closest to Sector 7, Jake said. And can you hit it? We barely have ships left, Ryan Tucker's voice came back. But yeah, we can make a run at it, and probably won't make it back though. Do it, Jake ordered. And the rest of us will keep the pressure on their core facilities, and they can't defend everywhere at once. This was the key insight that the humans had grasped intuitively. And the AI was brilliant at adapting to threats and exploiting mistakes, but it was designed to fight one battle at a time, and it could not conceive of losing being part of a winning strategy, and the humans were weaponizing their own defeats. Silnara watched Jake work with growing fascination, and the human was operating on multiple levels simultaneously, and maintaining his own tactical situation, coordinating with other teams, processing incoming intelligence, and constantly adapting. His strategy and his mind seemed to exist in a state of controlled chaos that should have been overwhelming, but instead appeared to be his natural environment. How are you tracking all of these variables without computational assistance? She asked during a brief lull in action. Jake glanced at her, surprised by the question. And I'm not really tracking them, not like a computer would, and it's more like pattern recognition. And I see the shape of things, how they connect, where the weak points are, and it's intuitive. Intuition is not reliable, Silnara insisted, and it leads to errors. Sometimes, Jake admitted, but it's fast. And in combat, fast beats perfect every time. And by the time you've calculated the optimal move, the situation has changed, and better to make a good decision now than a perfect decision too late. The Tactical Operations Center at the Galactic Military Academy had become crowded with observers, and word had spread through the instructor corps about the unusual developments in the simulation, and what should have been a routine training exercise was turning into something unprecedented. Commander Vexthor watched the holographic displays tracking all 7 human-led simulation instances, and around him instructors from a dozen species muttered in their native languages, analyzing the chaos unfolding before them. And it had been 72 simulated hours since the opening moves, and the human cadets showed no signs of slowing down. This is madness, Professor Quillneck said, his crystalline body chiming with agitation, and the Crystallians were renowned for their strategic patience, often planning campaigns that spanned decades, and they are burning through resources at an unsustainable rate, and the mathematical models all predict their collapse within another 48 hours. And yet they persist, Vexthor observed quietly. In Jake Morrison's simulation instance, the situation appeared dire by conventional standards, and his fleet was down to 1 damaged carrier, 2 cruisers and a handful of fighters, and the AI had adapted to his tactics, reinforcing its remaining production facilities and setting ambush fleets to counter the humans' aggressive strikes. But Jake wasn't fighting a conventional war. Here, Katie Brennan's voice crackled over the inter-team communication channel that the humans had established without authorization, and she had hacked together a way for the human cadets to share information across their separate simulation instances, and the AI in my instance just repositioned forces from Sector 7 to defend against my attack on Gamma Station. And that means Sector 7 is vulnerable. Confirmed. Danny Warren chimed in. And I'm seeing the same pattern. And it's pulling from the periphery to protect the core. Jake studied his tactical display. And the humans had figured out something that the AI's programmers had never anticipated. And they were treating 7 separate simulation instances as one coordinated campaign. And they were sharing intelligence, identifying patterns across multiple scenarios, and exploiting weaknesses that only became visible when you looked at the bigger picture. Ryan, you're closest to Sector 7, Jake said. And can you hit it? We barely have ships left. Ryan Tucker's voice came back, but yeah, we can make a run at it, and probably won't make it back though. Do it, Jake ordered, and the rest of us will keep the pressure on their core facilities, and they can't defend everywhere at once. This was the key insight that the humans had grasped intuitively, and the AI was brilliant at adapting to threats and exploiting mistakes. But it was designed to fight one battle at a time, and it could not conceive of losing being part of a winning strategy, and the humans were weaponizing their own defeats. Each simulation instance that collapsed took with it valuable data, and the humans learned what didn't work, what the AI couldn't predict, and where the exploitable gaps existed, and they shared this information instantly and adjusted their approaches, and it was evolution in real time, and the AI could not keep up. Silnara watched Jake work with growing fascination, and the human was operating on multiple levels simultaneously, and maintaining his own tactical situation, coordinating with other teams, processing incoming intelligence, and constantly adapting his strategy. And his mind seemed to exist in a state of controlled chaos that should have been overwhelming, but instead appeared to be his natural environment. "How are you processing all of these variables simultaneously?" she asked during a brief lull in action. "And your neural link shows no signs of computational overload, yet you are managing data streams that would require 3 Xanthari operators." Jake glanced at her. "And it's not really about processing," he said, "and it's more like feeling the flow of battle, and I can't explain it better than that. And on Earth, our ancestors hunted in packs, and they had to coordinate without technology, just instinct and quick decisions, and I guess some of that stuck with us." "That explanation defies logical analysis," Silnara said. But she was beginning to understand that human success was not despite their seemingly chaotic methods, but because of them. In Ryan Tucker's instance, the assault on Sector 7 proceeded exactly as expected and badly, and his small fleet jumped into a system that should have been lightly defended, but found themselves facing twice the expected forces, and the AI had predicted the move and set a trap. "Well, this is going poorly," Ryan commented over the channel as his ships took heavy fire. "Can you withdraw?" Amy Foster asked. "Negative," Ryan replied. "And they've got us boxed in, and we're taking the station with us, though." Ryan's fleet pressed forward in what could only be described as a suicide run, and ships exploded one by one, but they kept firing, kept advancing, drawing the AI's defensive forces into close quarters where the humans' aggressive tactics gave them a temporary advantage. And Ryan's last cruiser rammed the station at full speed, its reactor set to overload, and the explosion took out the station and most of the AI's defensive fleet. Ryan's instance just ended, Lisa Cortez reported, but he took out their Sector 7 infrastructure completely. "Good trade," Jake said without hesitation. "And that was their secondary production hub. And now they're down to one major facility and scattered minor ones. And keep the pressure on." In the observation center, the alien instructors were struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing, and military doctrine across the galaxy emphasized preservation of forces, careful resource management, and calculated risks. And the humans were doing none of these things. And they were fighting like their extinct ancestors must have fought, and with ferocity, creativity, and an acceptance of loss that other species found disturbing. "They fight as if they expect to lose," Quillnex observed. "And how can this lead to victory?" "Because they are not fighting to preserve," Vexthor said slowly, understanding dawning. "And they are fighting to win, and there is a difference." Professor Keth Nara, a Vrex military historian, accessed his data files with rapid clicking, and I have been reviewing human military history, and this behavior has precedent, and in their Second World War, human commanders routinely accepted casualty rates that would have caused other species to surrender. And in their ancient history, human warriors often fought in formations that guaranteed frontline casualties, but provided tactical advantage. "Death world mentality," Vexthor murmured, "and on Earth everything is a threat. And they evolved accepting that survival often means accepting loss, and they are wired for this kind of thinking." As simulated time progressed, the pattern became clear, and one by one, the human-led simulation instances were ending, but not in defeat, and each team fought until they had accomplished specific objectives, gathering intelligence, destroying key targets, or forcing the AI to commit resources to defend against them. And the last 3 instances, and led by Jake, Katie, and Amy, and had the benefit of all the intelligence gathered by the failed attempts. Katie Brennan's instance had become a masterclass in guerrilla warfare, and with only a handful of ships remaining, she had abandoned conventional fleet tactics entirely, and her forces operated as independent raiders, hitting supply lines, destroying unmanned logistics ships, and generally making the AI's existence miserable. And she could not win a direct engagement, so she did not try. And instead, she forced the AI to spread its forces thin, trying to defend against attacks that could come from anywhere. Amy Foster had taken a different approach, and her instance focused on a war of attrition, but not in the traditional sense, and she targeted the AI's mining operations and resource-gathering infrastructure, and without resources, the AI could not build new ships or maintain existing ones, and it was a slow strangulation and it was working. And Jake Morrison was coordinating all of it, his instance serving as the command center for a distributed campaign across multiple realities, and he was fighting his own battle while simultaneously acting as supreme commander for a war effort that should not have been possible. The simulation was entering its 4th day of simulated time, and by conventional standards this was still a blink of an eye, and most cadets would not have accomplished anything significant yet, and the humans had destroyed 2/3 of the AI's production capacity, crippled its logistics network, and were closing in on final victory. Kevin Brooks had been eliminated in his instance 3 hours prior, but not before he had accomplished his mission, and he had used his engineering expertise to rig a damaged freighter as a massive bomb, and he had piloted it manually into an enemy supply depot, and the explosion had destroyed enough munitions to supply an entire fleet for a year. Danny Warren was still operational, but barely, and his pilot skills had kept him alive longer than anyone expected, and he was running hit-and-run attacks with a single fighter squadron, and each attack barely made a dent in the enemy forces, but collectively they were bleeding the AI's resources and attention. Lisa Cortez had used her communications expertise in an unexpected way, and she had hacked into the AI's command network and inserted false data. And nothing major, just small errors in timing and positioning, but enough to create confusion and delay the AI's responses by precious seconds. The humans were not just fighting a war, and they were conducting a symphony of chaos, and each instance playing its part, each sacrifice serving a purpose, and the AI could not comprehend this level of coordination, because it thought in terms of individual battles, not interconnected campaigns. Jake watched his tactical display as another enemy patrol fell into one of Katie's traps, and the pieces were falling into place, and the AI was adapting, certainly, but it was adapting to the wrong things, and it was optimizing for efficiency when the humans were optimizing for impact, and it was calculating probabilities when the humans were creating chaos. "We're almost there," Jake said over the command channel, and Amy, "What's your status on the resource denial operation?" "Their main mining operation is running at 30% capacity," Amy reported, "and another 12 hours and they won't have enough raw materials to maintain their fleet." "Katie, keep them chasing shadows," Jake continued, "and every ship they commit to hunting you is a ship that's not defending their core facilities." "Already on it," Katie replied with a note of satisfaction in her voice, "and I just convinced them I'm planning an attack on their fuel depot in Sector 4. And they're moving half their reserve fleet to intercept." "Perfect," Jake said. "And because while they're looking at Sector 4, we're going to hit them somewhere else entirely." On the 5th simulated day, only 3 human-led instances remained active, and the Academy's observers had grown to over 50 instructors, many having abandoned their own duties to witness what was being called the most significant tactical demonstration in military history. Jake Morrison's command pod was hot with the strain of continuous operation, and his neural link had been active for longer than recommended, but he barely noticed the fatigue, and in front of him, the tactical display showed a galaxy that bore little resemblance to the starting position, and the AI's forces, once overwhelming, had been whittled down through constant pressure and unconventional tactics. "Final assessment," Jake said, his voice hoarse from hours of issuing orders. "And Katie, what's your status?" Katie Brennan's instance was operating on minimal resources, and her fleet consisted of 1 damaged cruiser and a handful of fighters, but she had tied down a significant portion of the AI's remaining forces with her hit-and-run tactics. "And I've got 3 AI hunter groups chasing ghosts in the outer systems," she reported, "and they think I'm planning another raid on their supply lines, and I'm actually planning to ram my cruiser into their last major production facility if you can get me an opening." "That's a one-way trip," Lisa Cortez pointed out. "Yeah, well, we're all on one-way trips here," Katie replied with dark humor, "and might as well make it count." Amy Foster's instance was in even worse shape tactically but strategically positioned, and she had managed to capture an asteroid mining facility and was using it to produce a small but steady stream of resources. "And I've got enough raw materials to build 1 more strike force," she reported, but it'll take 8 hours of simulated time. "And the AI knows what I'm doing and is moving to intercept. Let it come." Jake decided, and we're not building that strike force anyway. And it's a decoy. And how much antimatter do you have in your reserves? Enough for standard combat operations. Maybe 10 engagements, Amy calculated. Rig it all as a mine, Jake ordered. And when the AI fleet arrives to stop your construction, detonate the entire facility and take them with you. There was a pause, and what Jake was suggesting was technically allowed by the simulation rules. But it was the kind of strategy that would never occur to species that had not spent millennia creating increasingly creative ways to destroy each other. That's absolutely insane, Amy said, and I love it, and give me 2 hours. Jake turned to his own situation, and his fleet was the largest remaining, and 2 carriers, 5 cruisers, and supporting fighters, and by simulation standards, this was still a respectable force, and the AI had more ships, but its forces were scattered. Its production was crippled, and its adaptive algorithms were struggling to predict what the humans would do next. The problem was that Jake had run the calculations, and even with everything the humans had accomplished, a direct assault on the AI's final stronghold would fail, and the AI had consolidated its remaining forces there, and the defenses were simply too strong for Jake's battered fleet to overcome. "Click, Thar," Jake said to his Vrex teammate, "and you've been quiet. And what are you thinking?" The engineer's cybernetic implants flickered as he processed data, and I have been analyzing the AI's decision-making patterns, and it has adapted to your tactical aggression, your resource trading, and your willingness to accept losses, but it has not adapted to something else. "What's that?" Jake asked. "Surrender." Jake leaned forward, intrigued, and explained. The AI is programmed to accept surrender and process it according to standard military protocols. Click-Thar clicked, and surrendering forces are disarmed but preserved, and it is a fundamental rule of civilized warfare, and the AI has never encountered an opponent who would use surrender as a weapon. Silnara's eyes widened in understanding. "And you are suggesting we surrender our forces, allow them to be captured, then activate self-destruct sequences inside the AI's defensive perimeter? That is a violation of every rule of honorable combat," Click-Thar stated flatly. "And it is perfidy of the highest order, and it would be considered a war crime by galactic law. But this is a simulation," Jake said slowly, "and the objective is to win, not to be honorable, and the AI isn't a living thing. And it's a program designed to test tactical thinking, and it has a weakness we can exploit." The ethical implications hung in the air, and what Jake was proposing would work precisely because it violated fundamental codes of military honor that had governed galactic warfare for thousands of years. And it was the kind of tactic that only a species with humanity's brutal history would even conceive of. "I cannot participate in this strategy," Silnara said firmly, "and it goes against everything my people believe about warfare." "I understand," Jake said, and he meant it, "and you've been an excellent teammate, and I respect your principles, but I'm going to do this, and it's not real and no one actually dies. And if I can prove that the galaxy's military doctrine has blind spots, maybe that will save real lives someday." Silnara considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "And I will not stop you, but I will file a formal objection in my after-action report." "Fair enough," Jake said. Jake activated the communication channel to the remaining human teams. "And all right, everyone, and final play, and Katie, you execute your ramming attack on the production facility at time hack plus 30 minutes. And Amy, you blow your facility when their fleet arrives. And I'm going to request a ceasefire and surrender negotiations with the AI. They're going to analyze that as a trap," Danny Warren pointed out. "Of course they will," Jake agreed, but they'll also have to follow protocol. And the AI is bound by the same rules of warfare that govern the simulation, and it has to accept surrender if it's offered in good faith. And technically, I will be offering it in good faith, and I'm really going to have my ships power down and await processing. Until you activate every self-destruct in the AI's main base," Katie finished, "and you magnificent Deathworlder. And this is why the rest of the galaxy is terrified of us." The plan was set in motion, and Katie's instance executed first, her lone cruiser making a desperate run at the AI's production facility, and the AI's defenses engaged, but Katie had timed her approach perfectly, and she used a decaying moon's gravity to slingshot her ship at impossible speed directly into the facility's reactor, and the explosion was visible across several star systems. Katie's instance ended, But the AI's last major shipyard was gone. 2 hours later, Amy's trap was sprung, and the AI fleet arrived at the mining facility to find it abandoned except for the automated construction systems, and they moved in to secure the facility, and Amy triggered every antimatter container simultaneously, and the explosion vaporized the asteroid and most of the AI's remaining mobile fleet. Amy's instance ended, but the AI's military power was broken. Now it was Jake's turn, and he broadcast a surrender offer on all frequencies, requesting a ceasefire and formal negotiations according to the Galactic Conventions on Military Conduct, and the AI processed this request for exactly 3.7 seconds and an eternity in computational time, and analyzing every possible trick and deception. But the surrender offer met all legal requirements, and Jake was powering down his weapons, maintaining position, and transmitting his fleet's authorization codes, and the AI had no choice under its programming but to accept. What the AI could not conceive of was that Jake had no intention of betraying the surrender. And technically, his ships were truly disarmed, but every human ship had been modified over the past 5 days to include maximized reactor overload capabilities that could be triggered remotely, and the ships would surrender, be taken into custody, and then Jake would detonate them all inside the AI's defensive perimeter. It was underhanded and it was dishonorable, and it was the kind of tactic that only a species that had survived extinction-level events through sheer cunning would devise. And it worked perfectly. The AI moved its forces to surround and capture Jake's fleet, and Jake waited until the AI's ships were in optimal position, and close enough that the explosions would chain react, far enough from civilians that collateral damage would be minimized by simulation standards. "It's been an honor," Jake said to his team, and then he triggered the detonation sequence. 17 ships exploded simultaneously in a carefully orchestrated pattern, and the cascade of energy ripped through the AI's defensive fleet, overloaded its shields and cracked the armor of its command station, and secondary explosions blossomed across the AI's stronghold as fuel stores and ammunition magazines detonated. When the light faded, the AI's forces were shattered, and its command structure was decimated, and its ability to coordinate was destroyed. The simulation declared victory for the human team at 5 days, 14 hours and 37 minutes of simulated time, and the previous record had been 9 years and 7 months. The humans had not just beaten the unbeatable simulation, and they had annihilated it in less than a week. Jake's command pod hissed as it depressurized and opened, and he stumbled out, his legs weak from hours in neural link, his mind still processing the transition from simulated combat to reality. And around him, other pods were opening, releasing disoriented cadets into the simulation chamber. The room was silent, and every instructor, every observer, every cadet stood frozen, and they had just witnessed something that should have been impossible. And the galaxy's most difficult military simulation had been destroyed by a handful of humans who fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Vexthor stood at the center of the chamber, and his 4 eyes were unreadable, and slowly, deliberately, he began the Krellian gesture of respect, and pressing his clawed hands together, one by one, the other instructors joined in with their own species equivalents, and the chamber filled with the sounds of acknowledgement. And the humans had done the impossible, and the galaxy would never look at warfare the same way again. The command pod hissed as it depressurized and opened, and Jake Morrison stumbled out, his legs weak from hours in neural link, his mind still processing the transition from simulated combat to reality, and around him other pods were opening, releasing disoriented cadets into the simulation chamber. Commander Vexthor stood at the center of the chamber, his 4 eyes unreadable, and the observation gallery above was packed with instructors, academy officials, and even a few members of the Galactic Military Council who had arrived after hearing reports of what was happening. Complete silence filled the chamber. Jake expected anger, and he expected accusations of cheating, of violating the spirit of the exercise if not the letter of the rules, and instead Vexthor began a slow rhythmic gesture, and pressing his clawed hands together in the Krellian gesture of respect. One by one, the other instructors joined in with their own species equivalents, and the Zenthari bowed their heads and the Crystallians chimed in harmony, and the Vrex clicked their mandibles in approval. In 3,000 years, Vexthor finally spoke, his voice carrying through the chamber, and no cadet has ever completed that simulation in less than 9 years. And you did it in 5 days, and you did not just beat the simulation, and you broke it. Katie Brennan, standing with the other human cadets, found her voice first, and sir, we can explain. No explanation is necessary, Vexthor interrupted, and we have reviewed every decision, every engagement, every unorthodox tactic you employed, and what you did was not against the rules, though it certainly violated conventional doctrine, and that was precisely the point. The commander walked among the assembled cadets, his gaze moving from human to alien, and this simulation was designed to be unbeatable through conventional means, and it was designed to teach you that some problems cannot be solved, that some wars cannot be won quickly, but you humans showed us something we had forgotten, and that conventional wisdom is only wisdom until someone finds a better way. Silanara stepped forward hesitantly. And Commander, I must file an objection, and the final tactic employed by Cadet Morrison was ethically questionable. Yes, Vexthor acknowledged, but tell me, Silnara, if you were facing an existential threat to your species, would you choose honor over survival? The Zenthari cadet struggled with the question, and her species had never faced such a choice, and they had evolved on a world where cooperation was rewarded and aggression was punished by a stable ecosystem, and the very concept of total war was foreign to them. I do not know, she admitted, and that, Vexthor said, and is why the humans won, and they come from a world where every generation of their species faced potential extinction, and where honor was a luxury and survival was paramount, and they carry that legacy in their tactics, their thinking, their willingness to do whatever is necessary. Professor Quill next descended from the observation gallery, his crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns. And there will be controversy, he stated, and many will argue that such aggressive tactics should be discouraged, that the humans are bringing their death world violence into civilized space. Let them argue, Vexthor replied, and because while they debate, our potential enemies are watching and learning, and the galaxy is not as peaceful as we like to pretend, and there are threats in the dark spaces between stars, species that do not share our values of honor and restraint, and if we face such threats, would you rather have commanders who fight with honor and lose, or commanders who fight to win? Ryan Tucker cleared his throat, and sir, if I may, and we didn't do this to prove humans are better warriors or anything like that, and we did it because you presented a problem and we tried to solve it, and that's all. That humility is noted, Cadet Tucker, Vexthor said with what might have been a smile, but do not diminish what you have accomplished, and you have challenged 3,000 years of military doctrine in 5 days. And you have shown that adaptability and creative thinking can overcome superior numbers and resources, and these are lessons the galaxy needs to learn. Clickthar stepped forward, his cybernetic enhancements glowing softly, and I have analyzed the human approach extensively, and their success was not due to superior technology or greater intelligence, and it was due to their willingness to accept risk and adapt faster than their opponent could respond, and they fought as if every battle could be their last. And paradoxically, this mentality allowed them to survive longer than those who fought cautiously. Danny Warren raised his hand tentatively. And so what happens now, and are we in trouble? Trouble, Vexthor repeated, and no, Cadet Warren. You are not in trouble and in fact effective immediately. All 7 of you are being assigned as tactical consultants to review and update our military training programs, and we need to understand how you think, how you assess risk, how you make decisions under pressure, and we need to teach these concepts to other cadets. The human cadets exchanged glances, and they had expected punishment or at least stern lectures about respecting established procedures, and instead they were being asked to help reshape galactic military doctrine. Professor Kethnara clicked forward, his Vrex body moving with mechanical precision. And I have a question for the human cadets. And when you coordinated across multiple simulation instances, you did so without authorization and without formal communication protocols, and how did you achieve such seamless cooperation? Lisa Cortez answered, and we grew up playing team games and sports video games, group activities where you had to coordinate quickly without lengthy planning, and we learned to read each other's intentions, to trust each other's judgment, and to adapt our individual actions to support the group goal. And it wasn't formal, it was just natural. Quilnix repeated thoughtfully. And for humans, perhaps, but this kind of intuitive coordination is rare among most species, and we tend to rely on structured hierarchies and detailed plans, and the humans demonstrated a form of organized chaos that should not work but clearly does. Amy Foster spoke up, and if I may add something, and we also weren't afraid to fail, and every instance that ended was just data, just information we could use to improve, and we didn't see defeat as shameful, we saw it as educational, and I think that made a big difference. The acceptance of failure as a learning tool, Vexthor mused, and another Deathworld trait. And on stable worlds, failure often means death or permanent loss, and species from such worlds learn to avoid failure at all costs, but on Earth, failure is constant, and those who learn from it survive and those who don't perish, and this creates a very different relationship with risk. Kevin Brooks had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now he spoke, and there's something else too, and we trusted each other completely. And when Jake gave an order, we followed it even if it seemed crazy. And when Ryan said he'd take out a station even though it meant losing his instance, we believed him. And that trust, that willingness to sacrifice for the team, and I think that's what really made the difference. The observation gallery had grown even more crowded, and cadets from other classes had heard what happened and were crowding in to see the humans who had accomplished the impossible, and alien cadets who had spent months or even years working on the simulation stared at the 7 humans with mixtures of awe, confusion, and in some cases fear. A young Crystallian cadet raised a crystalline appendage. And excuse me, but how did you know your tactics would work? And what if you had been wrong? We didn't know, Katie answered honestly, and we made educated guesses based on what we observed, and we took calculated risks, and sometimes we were wrong. And that's why 4 of our instances ended before the simulation was complete. But we learned from those failures and adjusted, and eventually we found approaches that worked. But you risked everything on uncertainty. The Crystallian protested. And what if all 7 instances had failed? Then we would have failed, Jake said simply. But we would have learned something. And failure isn't the end. It's just information. And you try. You fail, you learn, you try again, and eventually you succeed or you die. And that's how evolution works. That's how progress works. And sitting still and being cautious doesn't guarantee survival. It just delays the inevitable. The Crystallian cadet seemed disturbed by this philosophy, and many of the alien observers did as well. And they came from worlds where caution was rewarded, where slow and steady approaches minimized risk, and the human willingness to gamble everything on uncertain outcomes was fundamentally alien to them. Vexthor raised a clawed hand for silence, and there will be time for further analysis and discussion. But for now, I want to acknowledge what these cadets have accomplished. And they have not only beaten an unbeatable simulation, they have opened our eyes to new possibilities in tactical thinking, and the galaxy will study what happened here for generations, and whether we adopt human methods or not, we can no longer ignore the fact that our conventional wisdom has limits. The commander turned to face Jake directly. And Cadet Morrison, you used a tactic in your final engagement that many will consider dishonorable, and surrendering forces only to detonate them as weapons. And this violates the spirit of the Galactic Conventions on Military Conduct. And what do you say to those who will accuse you of war crimes? Even in simulation, Jake met Vexthor's gaze steadily. And I say that the simulation was designed to test tactical thinking, not adherence to social conventions, and in a real war against a real enemy that threatened Earth. I would do whatever was necessary to protect my people. And honor is meaningless if everyone you love is dead. And I'd rather be alive and ashamed than dead and honorable. And if that makes me a bad person by galactic standards, then I guess I'm a bad person. The honesty of the response seemed to surprise many observers, and they expected excuses or justifications, and instead Jake had simply stated the brutal calculus of survival that drove human thinking. You are not a bad person, Cadet Morrison, Vexthor said quietly, and you are a survivor. And your species are all survivors. And that is both your greatest strength and your most terrifying quality, and the galaxy will need to decide whether to embrace that strength or fear it. But make no mistake, after today, no one will underestimate humanity again. The assembly was dismissed, and as the cadets filed out, the humans found themselves surrounded by curious aliens asking questions, requesting explanations, and in some cases, simply staring as if seeing them for the first time. Jake felt exhausted but satisfied. And they had come to the academy to learn, and instead they had taught, and the galaxy was about to discover what Earth had known for millions of years, and that survival belongs to the bold, victory favors the adaptable, and sometimes the only way to win is to rewrite the rules entirely. The Deathworlders had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.